Welcome everybody back into NerdSesh. As always, I'm Carson Breber and alongside me is Logan Camden. And today, as we approach the weekend, we have another NBA division preview for you guys. I am extremely excited for this one because it is an awesome division. We're going to be talking Northwest today. So we've got several teams that will be very, very much in the mix. Logan, who do you have atop this division?
Yeah, it's real top heavy, and so I can see, kind of going anywhere with these top three teams, but I'm going to take the Thunder to win this division this year.
I agree. I actually think that the Thunder are a pretty clear favorite, especially in the regular season. And they're a fun team because obviously they've been viewed as like the young up-and-coming darling. They won 58 games last year with one of the youngest rosters in basketball. But they got very serious, and they were aggressive this offseason, and they added some more veteran contributors, some winning players, and Isaiah Hartenstein, Alex Caruso. They shed the poison that was Josh Giddey. How do you feel about those moves specifically, Logan, and how that impacts things for OKC?
I love them. I think they won the offseason. One addition by subtraction, I do agree with you. Getting rid of Josh Giddey is going to benefit this team in a lot of ways. You don't have a guy that can get picked on defensively. You don't have a non-shooter that you don't trust in the lineup. Like, there are things that Giddey does at a high level, right? He's a really good playmaker, but I think when you're looking at an absolute winning context with Oklahoma City, I think he brings them down a little bit. And the guys they added in, I'm in love with. Isaiah Hartenstein, I think, addresses all of their biggest needs, specifically, front court size and depth. The tallest player that wasn't Chet last year was Jay Will, so they addressed that. You get some rebounding from Hartenstein. This team was 28th in rebound rate. We highlighted that as a key component that may let the Thunder down in a big series in the playoffs. And then rim protection. Chet's one of the best young rim protectors in basketball, but they severely lacked rim protection outside of Hartenstein. And these two are two of the best in all of basketball at that. Outside of Chet. And these two guys are two of the best in basketball. So I think it also brings you some lineup versatility where you can play them alongside each other. You can stagger their minutes in different lineups. And Hartenstein, I don't know if a lot of people realize this. I know we're big fans of Hartenstein here, but he also brings some shooting touch and some playmaking, And it's not just the dribble handoff stuff that you see where, he'll do that, and he does it at a really high level. And it's really effective offense starting out, just getting your offense in motion. But Hartenstein's a legitimately good passer, and he's got some of that nice floater touch in the mid-range. So,
oh my God,
Hartenstein, I just think, is a really damn good center at this point in his career. And then the other big addition they made, my doppelganger, I get that guy at the gym more than anybody else, man. I will have guys walk in there, Carson, and just yell out, Caruso!
I can't blame him.
Neither can I. I mean, you see a bald fella, what are you going to do? But
there's only so many.
Caruso is such an elite complementary player, and the fact that they were able to just basically swap him straight up for Josh Giddey is the home run of all trades. And when I look at the matchups and the best players that they're going to battle in the Western Conference playoffs, Carson, I just think that the Thunder are much more well-equipped to battle with the best stars on other basketball teams, right? You think about them going head-to-head with Luka Doncic. Lou Dort did a phenomenal job individually, but now you have two guys that can legitimately match up against Luka Doncic with the addition of Caruso. And you have another guy that can potentially X out a Kyrie Irving. When you look at the Denver Nuggets, I thought that if they got matched up that they'd be a little bit overwhelmed. Now you have Hartenstein and Chet Holmgren that can be on the court, and you can have one of them play help side and one of them straight up against Nikola Jokic. I just think the Thunder are a little bit more matchup proof than they were last year. I thought they had significant flaws throughout their lineups. If it was size, if it was that front court depth, if it was rebounding, if it was individual matchups against star players. And in a lot of ways, I think Caruso and Hartenstein make them matchup proof. It's invaluable because around this team, you have star talent at the top. You have scorers everywhere. You have guys who can defend and shoot. But now you have guys that you have added in the offseason with really specific skill sets that elevate your floor and your ceiling, and I think just match up well against the other stars in the West. So not only are the Thunder, because of these additions, my favorite in this division, I think they're going to be my favorite in the West and probably my number one seed. I think they crushed this offseason by adding Hartenstein and Caruso, man. I don't think they could have done any better, man.
I agree. They absolutely killed it. And what was very apparent was that they needed to get bigger in the front court. They needed to have the option to either play a more physical, big, rebounding power forward alongside Chet, or have the option to slide Chet to the 4 and play him alongside a 5. And if they were going to go for that mold, which they did, I don't think they could have found a better player than Hartenstein. I am so in love with him as a player, and I am in love with his fit here in OKC. I legitimately think he might be the most underrated player in basketball, and I think people are going to continue to wake up to his value. But he was phenomenal for the Knicks in the playoffs. I thought pretty clearly their third best player after Brunson and OG, and still people are talking more about DiVincenzo. They're talking more about Josh Hart. Isaiah Hartenstein is an incredibly impactful, versatile, winning center, and the fit here is tremendous. He's come off the bench in the first 2 games of the preseason, which I don't mind. I think that makes sense for this team. I want to see him play starter minutes. I want to see him out there for about 30 minutes a night because he's that good. They've certainly paid him enough to where you would expect him to get that sort of playing time. But staggering him and Chet is more than fine with me just because you have such overwhelming depth of quality wings, of super skilled perimeter players that you want to have one of those two on the floor at all times. Like, shout out to Jay Will, but I would just rather have the Chet Hartenstein stagger, and then they can play together for 12 minutes a game, and I think that they fit well together. The thing that has maybe stood out most to me about watching Hartenstein with this team in preseason so far, though, is just how much playmaking he injects into this offense. Like you mentioned, the ability to run handoffs. He can do that with anybody. We saw a Hartenstein-Chet handoff where Chet pump faked from beyond the 3-point line and then had an aggressive drive and was able to get a dunk out of it. But they can really have him facilitate any sort of action from the top of the key, from the free throw line, any sort of off-ball screening action, any sort of cutting. Like, he's just incredibly adept at executing those passes, and he doesn't hurt their spacing because of his touch out to 12, 13 feet. I mean, he's damn near 60% on floaters from that range, so you can't help off of him in the way that you could a weak shooter, in the way that you could a conventional rim finishing big, because he is so incredibly efficient, and those little dump off passes are always going to be available if you overhelp on a drive. So offensively, I think it's a great fit. And defensively, he and Chet out there together are just a monstrous duo. You mentioned, I mean, they were 2 of the most dominant rim protectors last season, both holding a players more than 11% below their typical field goal percentage at the rim when defended by Chet and Hartenstein. This is just a ridiculous stat. Don't put too much stock into this because it's preseason, it's small sample size. I just think it's amazing and also hilarious. They've played 31 possessions together, Logan, in the preseason, Chet and Hartenstein, and they have a defensive rating of 54.8 on those possessions. They've allowed 17 total points. Teams are scoring basically a quarter of possessions so far when they try to go at those two, and it's because they are both dominant interior defenders, and they both can guard in space. Especially Chet is seamless guarding on the perimeter. And Hartenstein isn't just a good rim protector. He has great hands. He has good feet. He's a hell of a rebounder, which, as you mentioned, this team desperately needed. And he also brings the dimension of physicality, not just on the glass, but in terms of guarding dudes out of the post. Because Chet's raw length and his timing as a shot blocker makes him a better post defender than he gets credit for. But still, there are certain teams, right? You look at a Nikola Jokic, just these absolute monstrous bruisers who could play some bully ball against Chet. When you have Hartenstein, who is just physically more built for those matchups, I think that he's a pretty good option there. But what is probably more valuable than having Hartenstein alone is that allows Chet to play the roamer role and to be constantly involved as a helper on those guys. What have we seen as the single best archetype against a Nikola Jokic specifically, who is such a monstrous scorer and passer? Put a big physical post defender on him, like a Karl Anthony Towns, and then have your elite best pure rim protector roaming off, guarding Aaron Gordon in the dunker spot so he can help on all those actions, try to take away those passes, challenge both them at the rim. That's what they can do now with Hartenstein guarding Jokic and with Chet guarding Aaron Gordon. If you think about any of these big bully ball teams, right, you draw the Timberwolves, who have a huge front court. Easy solution, man. You put Hartenstein on Randle. He can't get bullied physically. And then you put Chet on Gobert so he can, again, be that super destructive helper. Like, It's just such a dominant interior defensive duo that they have, and it's not the kind of group that can get exploited in matchups because they both move so well, and because you don't have to play both of them out there if you're against a more perimeter-oriented team, because you have so many great perimeter defenders who are all super skilled offensively as well, but nobody's bullying them with Hartenstein out there, and I think that that's huge. I think that that is a huge improvement for this team, and I think he unequivocally makes them better on both sides of the ball. I'm so excited for what he brings. But the Caruso fit is amazing as well, and I should say both these guys kind of fit anywhere, right? They have those sort of plug-and-play versatile skill sets. They're just winning players. Like, if I were to draft the league just from the top, these two dudes would be among the first 75 players I would take if my goal is to win a title, and I know I'm going to have a couple star shot creators in front of them. Obviously, Caruso is an elite point of attack defender, in my opinion, the best defensive guard on the planet right now, who's also a monster in passing lanes, who brings some rim protection as a guard. Like, he's just everywhere. He's such a disruptor, and you've already seen that in preseason. Offensively, very good in transition, elite cutting guard, and has improved to where I would say he's a good three-point shooter. It's still a bit of a question mark with him, but I think he's above average in a spot-up role, and he has the ability to attack closeouts and drive in those spots. And what he also brings, like Hartenstein, and they both already have chemistry between the two of them, we've seen that in preseason, is that dimension of ball movement. Because that was something that kind of bogged down this offense in the playoffs last year. There was a lot of stagnant ISO ball, and the shot making around Shai in particular wasn't good enough, and J-Dub wasn't able to reach the level they needed as a pure one-on-one on-ball shot creator in a tough environment where Dallas is roaming off of shooters, and so there's aggressive help in the paint at all times. They weren't able to keep the ball moving effectively enough to create high-quality shots consistently. And now you just have two really good ball movers, versatile offensive players, and I think that's something that they needed. And with Caruso in the fold now, I think that they have the best overall perimeter defensive personnel in basketball, on top of having this insane interior duo. Like, when you have Caruso and Lou Dort, both of whom are all defense caliber guards, and then you have Shai, who's still a plus defender and brings some unique secondary rim protection as a wing player. You have J-Dub, who's a plus defender off the bench. You have Cason Wallace, and you have Aaron Wiggins. Like, they are just oozing with athleticism and quickness and dog on the perimeter. So I couldn't be higher on this OKC team, legitimately. And I've been singing their praises and saying, like, this is a team that's going to win multiple titles ever since very early last year at the latest. Like, I was extremely high on Chet. I've been extremely high on SGA. I've been in love with J-Dub, but I picked them to lose in the second round last year, and a lot of people are like, oh my God, enough of the OKC hate. There was never any skepticism for me about the long-term dominance this team was going to achieve, but they were super young last year. They were super slight, super weak on the glass. They had a Josh Giddey, who I viewed as a negative. So no, I didn't think they were going to win the title last year, but they did exactly what they needed to this year to put themselves at the forefront of that conversation.
Yeah, and they didn't overpay, or they didn't, they didn't give away, crazy assets to pull in. That's
They didn't
what's
lose
so
anything.
crazy is
They didn't lose anything that's core to who they are.
exactly. And what I like too, man, is one, the other thing that Hardenstein and Caruso bring too is they bring in that sort of veteran leadership and presence that I think this team did need, because you have so many young basketball players. But also, like you said, they're smart. They're going to play unselfishly. And the thing that I like the most is this team is so talented on the perimeter and in the front court. They just have the most lineup versatility, I think, of any team in the league, where you have counters for whatever the other team is throwing at you, and with that, you can ride the hot hand. I know that can get a little bit overblown, but it's like, all right, well, Jay Will's not knocking down shots, we'll sub in somebody else. All right, well, Kason's not doing his job, we got somebody else we can go to. You don't have to be forced in these rigid lineups. They have, I think, the most versatility in the league. So I think we're on a collision course for Thunder Celtics this year. I felt it was Denver, Boston last year. We don't end up getting that because Minnesota pulls something out of their hat. But I do think we're on a collision course for Oklahoma City. And just to add some context to how great this team already was last year without these additions, Carson, this team was top 5 in offensive rating, defensive rating, and net rating last year. They were the number 3 team in offensive rating. They were the number 4 team in defensive rating. And they were second in terms of net rating. That's with, like, the youngest roster in the league.
Yep.
with ascending talent. And that's the other side of this coin. They add guys that are going to help them win now. How much better are these guys going to get, right? Chet shot
Absolutely.
like shit in the playoffs last year. I don't think that's going to happen again. Jalen Williams didn't play up to his standard in the playoffs last year. I don't think that's going to happen again. I think those are growing pains of young players in their first big playoff run under the spotlight. I think they're going to be more composed. I think they're going to be under more control. And I also think this has given them a little bit of a chip on their shoulder where, they lost. They felt that taste of defeat. And now I think they're going to be hungry for more. And on top of that, I also think they have one of the best coaches in basketball in Mark Daigneault. I think he can scheme up stuff the way other coaches can't. Yeah, Oklahoma City, I'm going to take to win the West, man. I'm definitely all in on that. And I'm just excited to see how much better these young guys get. I just can't wait to see this full thing together, man. I agree with you, dude. They're the second title favorite to me. I've got Boston number one right now, but I would completely understand if you have this team atop your championship hierarchy. I'm very high on the Oklahoma City Thunder this year.
To me, they're like 50-50 with Boston. I have been agonizing over who I think is going to win the title. And for OKC, it basically comes down to two dudes. Because I agree with so much of what you said, right? They are more veteran now. I love the Caruso and Hartenstein additions. I think they have the most lineup combinations in basketball. I think they have the best top 9 in basketball. The number of quality players here is ridiculous. Shai has shown us that he is there. If you weren't wildly impressed by Shai's postseason last year, I just don't know what you were watching. In a congested offensive environment, especially in that Dallas series, he was just able to dazzle with his shot making and still score with great volume and efficiency. He did his job. He's a top 5 player. He's there. It comes down to Chet and it comes down to J-Dub, because those are the two guys who are unquestionably core star pieces here, and they just didn't quite play like it yet in last year's postseason. But my expectations for both of them this year are high. I'd be surprised if Chet isn't an all-star. When I saw Chet as a prospect, he was the best dude who I had ever evaluated. Now, granted, that was only in a few years of prospect evaluation, and that was before Wemby, but I thought this dude literally has the dream skill set for a modern big. He's like a damn near a generational rim protecting talent. He is. Fuck the damn near. Wemby coming up right after him doesn't take away from that. Chet and Wemby are both insane generational rim protectors who can also really guard in space, and who's an elite shooting big, who's an incredibly fluid ball handler, who can attack closeouts, who play makes well for his position, who's a lob threat. Like, he checked every box you could want outside of a couple of just like freak all-time traits that you get from an Embiid or a Jokic offensively. And he's already so great at so much. He's obscenely efficient. He's a top 8 defender on the planet. I think if you just give him a few more minutes per game, he'll give you all-star production this season. And hopefully he stays healthy, but he did for all of last year. And I think he'll be able to do even more with the ball in his hands this year. That's where I'm expecting a little bit of growth. Already last year, he was a very efficient pick and roll and isolation creator, which is insane for a 7-foot rookie. But I think that combination of pull-up shooting, the ability to drive the ball, and the ability to facilitate, I think he can become even more lethal, especially if we do see him more at the 4. I mean, he's playing in a 5-out system no matter what, but that's what I'm most excited for with Chet. And if his jumper's more consistent, which it should be because I think he's an elite shooting talent, then I'm all in for what he can do in the postseason. The one thing that's been weird, I don't know if you've seen this, Logan.
I was just about to ask you.
Yeah, I don't know what's up with that. And for those of you who haven't seen, his form looks different right now. His hand placement is different. It's lower on the ball, and he's taking off his guide hand really early. So
it's almost it looks
damn near
looks
like a one-handed shot.
I was gonna say it looks like more Magic Johnson-esque, man. Like
It's
literally
a very one-handed shot. And they asked J-Dub about it, or J-Dub spoke about it, and he said that was just a drill on hand placement because there's one clip that was really circulating. But if you watch just the few jumpers that he's taken in-game in the preseason, it looks like that motion, like his guide hand is coming off really early. But again, he's literally taken 3 jump shots in the preseason. So I want to monitor that. Like, we'll see what's up with that. But Chet has always been an elite jump shooter. I think last year's postseason was fluky. I get that in the regular season he was a bit inconsistent. but he was still better than 37%. He was damn near 40% in college. I think he's a monster there. The one area that I don't think he'll progress that was problematic for this team last year is his ability to attack mismatches out of the post. I just don't think physically he's going to be there. And that was a problem against Dallas because they were able to switch everything without going up against a 5 who could physically punish them for that. And Chet's just so slight. He doesn't have that sort of post game. But I think as an all-around basketball player, he's just going to get better. And that's the natural progression you can't underestimate with a team this young. And with dudes this phenomenally talented, I think Chet's going to be a top 10 player, very possibly a top 5 player in basketball. So yes, I think he's going to get better year over year. J-Dub, I'm also expecting more from because I've thought that J-Dub is like the perfect third star for this team. But he struggled in the postseason. He went from an 87th percentile pick and roll scorer in the regular season to 47th percentile in the playoffs. His isolation efficiency dropped noticeably, and he struggled attacking that Dallas defense that, again, was a difficult matchup because they were able to have such constant elite rim protection in the paint. And the OKC shooting and ball movement wasn't good enough to hold them accountable for that. But I do think that was a very specific, challenging matchup for those reasons. And now you eliminate the Giddey minutes, who was one of those problematic non-shooters. I just expect OKC to shoot better and keep defenses more honest. Like, you have really good spot-up shooters in that series who just weren't shooting the ball very well. And J-Dub's got a year of that playoff experience now. So I just think he's too good at too much to be a playoff dropper. I mean, he is a freakishly complete basketball player. He's a high-end athlete. He's got crazy change in pace, shiftiness. He's a damn good mid-range shooter. He's a 40% three-point shooter. He can do it pulling up and off the catch. He's a great cutter. He's a high-end defensive guard. He's a very good playmaker. Like, he just excels in so many different ways that I'm still really all in on J-Dub. As your third player, like, I think that he's one of the best in the league that you could have in that role. And I just think this offense has more layers to it now with the playmaking that you have, bringing in a Caruso and a Hartenstein. They have insane depth. They have so many lineup combinations, as we've said. They have so much skill, so much athleticism, such elite defensive personnel, and they have a bona fide superstar who I trust more than Boston. So it's very, very close for me between these two teams, man. And I've been saying that I think Boston is the favorite on paper. I've been saying that I slightly preferred them as my title favorite. I think I'm taking OKC. Like, I've been saying, this is going to be a dynasty. I really think that it can start this year. They have the clear potential to be the best offense and the best defense in the league. They're elite in the half court. They're elite in transition. They're elite on the interior defensively. They're elite on the perimeter. Now, so does Boston. Like, that's the thing. I think that these are two juggernauts who we're looking at this year. They probably have more total talent than Boston now because of how much they crushed the offseason and because of just how many damn good basketball players they have. But there is still an insane level of talent, specifically in that Boston starting 5. The one thing that concerns me a little bit beyond J-Dub and Chet, who I really think this hinges on, like, they have to play at a level that is comparable to Jaylen Brown and Kristaps Porzingis. I don't think they have to outplay those dudes, but they have to be definitely in that range, is just how reliably elite Boston shooting is. And we can talk about the variance there, but like, this is a team that's going to lead the league in three-point volume and shoot 40%. And the spacing that comes along with that is so elite. And there's just a couple more questions with OKC, because Caruso can be hot and cold, because Lou Dort can be hot and cold, because Hartenstein, even though I think he's not bad for spacing, he's not a three-point shooter. That's the one thing where I just think maybe OKC has some issues where that bogs them down a little bit and they can't totally hold defenses accountable. But again, I think so much of this hinges on J-Dub being that legit second shot creator, Chet doing his job as a shot maker. And I believe in both those dudes deeply. And I just have a feeling, man, I think this team is going to be special. It's so, so close. But the number of players they have who can impact and swing a big game, the number of creators they have, the number of offensive skilled players that they have, I'm leaning OKC. It is so slight. Like, I have been going back and forth on this down to the wire, but I think this is an exceptionally talented team that is on the way to doing great, great things. The experience is still a question, but it's certainly less of a question than it was last year.
Yeah, and I think those young guys are going to progress to the means. I think they're better than they played in the playoffs. And that being said, for Boston too, it's like if Boston slips and plays the way that they did last year, where Jason Tatum can't hit a jump shot, where Kristaps Porzingis is, can't give you over 25 minutes a night, I think the Thunder are going to win. But when I say that, I also think that Boston is going to progress back to the mean too,
I agree
right?
completely.
I think that Tatum is going to play better. I think that Porzingis will be more healthy. I think that Jaylen Brown will play, more consistently great. So
Yeah.
I think both of these teams are going to have to throw their best punch, and whoever blinks first may lose. Like the shooting variance it's so close between these two teams. I do think shooting variance could decide the series, and it swings a lot of series. But I agree with you though when you're highlighting the Thunder's question marks on the perimeter. I think I have a few more question marks about them with all the guys you mentioned, and then if you want to include Kason, if you want to include Dort, if you want to include Wiggins in those equations, they're good shooters, but I think there's a little more variance there. So I'm going to take Boston because I value that veteran leadership more. I think this team is coming out hungry. I've loved what Missoula has been preaching all season long. Like this is a team that doesn't seem content, but I think it's a collision course, man. I think we are heading for a battle of two heavyweights, man. I'm so excited. I'm more excited than I was last year, and I was excited at the prospect of a Denver Boston series. I'm way more excited at a OKC Boston. These teams are so freaking talented, man. But with that too, I don't know. We're just thinking about this hypothetical matchup, and again, the season hasn't started, so I don't want to get too much in this. What if Al Horford regresses a little more, right? What if a player does go down on the front court for Boston? Those are advantages where I do think Oklahoma City has an advantage where, again, hypothetically, knock on wood, I don't want this to happen to either of these two teams. Oklahoma City, more than any other team in basketball, I think is equipped to deal with a major injury to somebody in the way that another team isn't because of how great their depth is. So I think that is a distinct advantage that Oklahoma City has. But yeah, as of right now, I'm taking OKC out of the West. I'm going to take Boston out of the East. I would take Boston to win the chip. But Oklahoma City's not far off.
No. I think that they are on basically even ground, and I think that these two teams are pretty clearly above everybody else, even though I think there's a lot of great teams in the league this year. I trust Shai to outplay Tatum, but I do think that Tatum is going to have a bounce back. I think that the shooting that we saw in last year's postseason was brutal, and you won't find anybody out there higher on Kristaps Porzingis than I am. I think that his elite rim protection is extremely valuable. I think he's one of the best post players in basketball. He was the most effective post scorer last year. He's obviously an extremely valuable stretch big. I think he would be a really interesting matchup against OKC because I think that they would try to force him to guard in space, which would be his one weakness. But at the same time, they would have the challenge of wanting to go 5 out offensively to make KP guard more in space. But then defensively, I think that he can kind of go through anybody. Like, I think that that would be a really challenging matchup for Chet, as much as I love him. But another thing about OKC is they just fly around defensively. And there's no team that's better equipped to send aggressive doubles and then have the speed and athleticism to recover out of that and to just pester you at all times. I think that they can guard the Jays. And this is the thing, man. Like, they're not confined to any one starting lineup ever, right? Like, you can just go with J-Dub and you can go with Lou Dort. And I think that those are two dudes who are pretty well equipped to guard those two. I think that those are, especially Lou Dort, right? Low center of gravity, strong guard, very difficult to go through, long. Like, I think that he would give trouble to a Tatum. You could put Caruso on a Jaylen Brown. I don't think he's conceding enough size for that to be a real advantage for Jaylen Brown. And they're both just elite irritants. I think both these teams have a lot of answers for one another, but this feels to me, man, like the rising moment for a dynasty, which is not at all to diminish the Celtics, because I think the Celtics are right there in terms of talent. And again, I think on paper, the Celtics are more of a sure thing. I'm just going to go with this feeling I have in my gut. I think this OKC team is really special. I think Shai is special. I think Chet is special. I think this is going to be one of the great duos probably in the history of this league, Logan. And I think J-Dub is a phenomenal third option, and I think that they've built the roster out around them incredibly well. And I think it is a better roster around them even than Boston. but it's tough because you can't discount how reliably great a Derek White is. You can't discount just the veteran all-around impact of a Drew Holiday. We saw it all last year. Nobody could touch Boston, and I think they can and should play better this year. But I think OKC is a hell of a lot better. I think this is a 58-win team that leaped tiers in my mind, and I'm extremely, extremely excited to see what they can do. But Logan, they're not the only big dog in this division whatsoever. Who's next for you?
That's crazy. I also have them winning 58 games exactly. That's wild.
I have them winning 62. No, I was saying they won 58 last year. I think this is going to be a season of reckoning for OKC, man. Wow. I think that they are bringing the Thunder. Come on now. I didn't even mean to do that. Unbelievable. I really do. One more thing. I saw our pal Isaac from the Deep 3 say that he feels like this is going to be like a 2015 Warriors kind of season. Not in terms of a play style, just in terms of being a young team that ascends and they take everybody by storm. I can see it. The challenge is the 2015 Warriors didn't have a Celtics team like this waiting opposite them, and that Celtics team is going to make it incredibly difficult for anybody else to seize that throne.
True. But, I mean, you talk about them potentially becoming a dynasty. That's what's on the table for Boston. Boston's not a dynasty yet, right? Like, they've been lingering around for a few years. Both of these teams have a ton at stake. And I want to be clear about something. I think that Oklahoma City has improved a lot more than last year, but the reason I have them winning 58 games is I also just think the West is way better this year.
And they were super healthy last year.
Yeah.
I think, though, the reason I have them winning more games is Boston. I just think they're going to be more pedal to the metal. I think that because they don't have that title, they just have more to prove in terms of the regular season. And they're so young, and they've always played so hard in the regular season under Dagnall. I think it's going to be a dominant regular season for them.
That's fair. I do have the Nuggets in my second spot here, despite them going down to the Timberwolves. And I just want to start with some of the roster changes. One, I think the big question is how they replace Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. I think that's the biggest question about this team in this season. And you think back to the team that won the title a few years back. They've lost now two really key members of that championship rotation. They lost Bruce Brown. They were never going to be able to pay him with what he was going to demand on the open market. And now they've lost Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. And I've seen some people try to diminish this loss and chalk it up to, you know, the Nuggets are such a great machine. They're just going to be able to keep humming the way that, you know, they always have. And that's what's tough about keeping a championship core together, right? They had to pay Jokic. They had to pay Jamal. They had to pay Aaron Gordon. They had to pay MPJ. There's going to be guys that can't get their money. And unfortunately, KCP was that guy that they had to sacrifice. And now, again, they've lost KCP and Bruce Brown. But the way that people have just tried to kind of sweep under the rug, oh, it's just KCP. You know, oh, they just lost Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. It's not that big of a loss. It's a huge loss for Denver. He's a 40% three-point shooter, as reliable as they come on the perimeter, great catch and shooter. And he's an elite perimeter defender, too. I don't think Christian Brown is going to be able to just step in and fill his shoes for a few reasons. One, you know, I think he's going to be able to bring maybe 70 to 80% of the value that KCP brings defensively just through heart and effort and energy. That's a lot of that end, but I don't think he's as good of a defender as KCP. And the bigger issue is what he's going to bring shooting. Christian Brown is still like a hesitant shooter. Like, he doesn't. Again, I play a lot of pickup basketball, man. The most frustrating thing to me is when a guy doesn't want to shoot an open three-pointer. I tell every one of my teammates that I play with, I don't care if you shoot an open shot and miss. Our offense generated a good look. That is all that we can do as an offense. I'm not going to be mad at you for missing. That's what we have other guys on our team for, to get the rebound. But if you hesitate, I'm going to be pissed off. If you choose to pass up that open jumper to pass the ball, that's where I have a problem. And Brown is just not confident in shooting the basketball, and that's a major, major limiter. He's just not confident, and that's a problem. And you just think about it psychologically when you're shooting a jump shot. That's not good, man. It's a Dion Waiters complex. I'd rather go 0 for 30 than 0 for 9. I don't know if I necessarily believe in that fundamentally.
Dion Waiters sure did.
He did. You know, you lose confidence. But the logic, I think, is sound. To be clear, if you go 0 for 9, you're going to need to start passing the rock, big dog. I'm either pulling you or you need to start cutting to the basket and doing little stuff. I don't want you to keep shooting.
Let's get a layup in there.
Yeah.
Let's get some easy ones.
Let's vary it up, man. But I just don't like having a guy that isn't that confident out there on the floor, and I think it could come back to bite them in a major spot. Again, it's just that's not an easy guy to replace. A consistent veteran who's going to bring you elite shooting and elite perimeter defense. And so I don't think they've addressed that. And so you're going to look to the other young guys on this roster to help supplement his value. If it's Julian Strawther, if it's Peyton Watson, I don't think those guys are ready to just step into that role. And the other moving part here is the Russell Westbrook variable. He addresses a big need for Denver in terms of backcourt depth. They have just not had reliable ball handlers on this team that can help, in non-Jamal Murray minutes. I'm just not confident that he's going to actually work here in Denver. Carson, for the past few years where Russell has been moving from spot to spot and team to team, there's always this relentless hope and optimism that the light bulb, this eureka moment, is going to go off for Russell Westbrook where he starts playing the right way and playing more unselfishly and cutting to the basket and getting rebounds and setting screens. And we've seen him do a little bit of that. But there's always this thing with Russ, man, where I'm scared that I have floor spacing concerns where he's going to take a lot of jump shots and he's going to take his mid-range jumpers and where he can take the offense out of rhythm. I'm still worried about his play style and his decision-making because it's Russell Westbrook. And so I'm not just optimistic this is going to be a seamless fit. I think he's more talented than the backup guards that they've had in recent memory. I think he's more athletic than the backup guards, and I think he's better. But I worry about him getting a little too much dip on his chip, if you know what I mean. If trying to do too much the way the old Russell Westbrook has burnt us. So how do you see them trying to supplement KCP's value? And do you think Russell Westbrook is a good fit for this team?
I'll start with KCP because I think that that's the biggest concern. That's what demoted the Nuggets to me from being the West favorite. That along with OKC's improvement, but I thought it was pretty brutal that they weren't able to retain him at honestly a really reasonable dollar value, what Orlando got him for. That's the biggest question about this team. Christian Braun is your starting two guard. I do think very, very highly of KCP. I think he's a pretty elite defensive guard. I think Christian Braun can bring a lot of that defensive value, though. And it's not just because of effort and heart and grit and the things you were saying, even though he is a dog 100%. He is a damn good athlete. Like, we have seen him step in, and we have seen him guard some really high-level perimeter players pretty darn well. I think he can bring a lot of the same value there. I think offensively, he's got great feel as a cutter, and he runs the floor hard. So again, the athletic value, the off-ball value in those regards is there. The question is all about the shooting. Last year, KCP attempted almost 5 threes per 75 possessions, made almost 41% of them. Christian Braun in the regular season attempted 3.6 threes per 75 possessions and made over 38%. That difference might not look huge, but it felt big in practice, and especially in the playoffs. This is where we've seen the trepidation from Braun, and this is where we've seen him go cold and really become a problematic offensive player. 2 postseason runs. He's attempted just 2.4 threes per 75 possessions. He's made 21% of them. It is vital to this offense that alongside the Jokic-Murray tandem and alongside Aaron Gordon in the dunker spot doing his thing, you have 2 damn good spot-up shooters, 2 dudes who are going to move without the ball and be very efficient with really minimal touches, right? A lot of quick touch, catch, and shoot offense. That's what KCP did alongside MPJ. That's what they need from Christian Braun, especially because this is a low-volume three-point team, Logan. And I think that that is not bad for Denver, because what have we talked about when we've raved about this offense, even in historic conversations? The floor is so damn high because Jokic generates so many great shots for himself in the paint, because he generates so many great shots for cutters and for Aaron Gordon. And Jamal, when he's right, when he plays like the Jamal Murray that we're used to, is able to really dominate that mid-range area. So he doesn't have to be an extremely high-volume three-point shooter. So even though they don't necessarily have elite rim pressure at all in the conventional sense, and even though they aren't a high-volume three-point shooting team, they're still one of the great offenses that we've seen. But again, that requires 2 dudes at least who are going to take those spot-up looks at a high volume and who are going to make them at good efficiency, because this is already one of the lowest three-point volume shooting teams in the league. So I just think that it's essential that Braun brings that he is confident, and I'm worried about that. I don't think it's impossible that Christian Braun does grow up and that he does have a good shooting season. Because everything outside of that I really do like from him. But I'm not expecting him to be Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. I think KCP is damn near as good of just a straight-up 3-and-D player as you can get in basketball. And I think that this is clearly a downgrade there. But a lot of people are freaking out about the bench, Logan. And I don't get that. I think that this is clearly the best bench that they've had in Denver. And that starts with Russ. And there's not a bigger Russ skeptic on the planet than myself, Logan. I think I've been very forthcoming about that. I made an entire website about why he didn't deserve the 2017 MVP. You're not going to find a lot of people with that dedication to Russ skepticism. This is what I think people are forgetting, though. Reggie Jackson was awful last year. Like, he just has to be better than Reggie Jackson for this to be an upgrade. And you talk about worrying about Russ trying to do too much. Reggie Jackson was taking awful shots and he was missing them, and he wasn't bringing any of the positives that Russ brings. Like, automatically, Russ brings dimensions of athleticism and rim pressure and rebounding and playmaking and the ability to impact the game defensively when he buys in that Reggie Jackson just can't match. Do I think he's fundamentally going to change who he is? No, probably not. This guy just shot 26% in his playoff series for the Clippers, right? Like, I don't want to sanitize Russell Westbrook. He's not going to just remarkably suddenly become a better shooter. He's not going to stop overshooting in general, and that's going to be frustrating. But here's what I will say. His role is going to be less significant than it has been anywhere else throughout all the stops of his entire career. Less significant even than it was with the Clippers, I think. Also, not to overreact to preseason, in one of the few possessions he shared with Jokic on the floor in their preseason game, he cut off of a Jokic post-up. And he embraced cutting more last year than ever before. And Jokic just changes how people play, and he incentivizes cutting in a way that doesn't happen elsewhere, right? Will Barton is cutting off of Jokic. Dudes who don't cut in other offenses suddenly really adapt that and do so at a high level. Like, KCP is not going to be cutting in Orlando like he did in Denver, right? It's just a fundamental tenet of the offense. Everybody does it. So if there ever was a time for Russ to embrace that cutting aspect of his game, again, I don't think it's going to be like to the maximum extent to maximize the potential he could have as a cutter. I think it's going to be better than it's been, though. But mostly this is just about Russ helping to keep the bench units afloat. And there I think he brings essential creation, right? His inefficiency, even as a finisher around the rim, his shot selection. We can bemoan these things all we want. Again, we're talking about a bench unit here that needs ball handling, that needs somebody who can pressure the defense in any way, who can just get shots for himself and his teammates. And Russ brings that. So yeah, you got to keep him on a tight leash, right? I don't want Russ playing 25 minutes a game in the playoffs. I want him playing 15 minutes. But for those 15 minutes, he can change a game in a way that Reggie Jackson couldn't dream of. Reggie Jackson was unplayable. So I definitely think that's an upgrade. I definitely think that Dario Saric is a better backup center than DeAndre Jordan. I don't love Saric as your 5. I really think he's kind of playing out of position, but he's just a much better basketball player with his offensive skill and his playmaking, and he can hang in as a backup 5. Bench units aren't going to bully him there. You talk about Strother and Peyton Watson. They're both a year older. Strother brings a really, really high-level three-point shooting skill set. I think he has feel offensively. I think he competes defensively. Like, this team needs that, especially the three-point shooting they need. I think he's a legit all-around bench player. Watson at least brings his elite athleticism and his ability to impact the game defensively. Hunter Tyson's played a lot in the preseason. I'm not super high on him. He can shoot, he can cut, he can rebound. He's fine. Trey Alexander was good in Summer League. He's probably not going to play a lot, these last two guys, but I just feel like this is the year that a lot of people are like ringing the alarm bell on the Denver bench. And I'm thinking, have you guys seen their previous benches? Like, if you compare it to what they've been dealing with the past few years, it's clearly better. It's not great, but it's clearly better. And I think people are really underrating the Nuggets, man. Like, I'm concerned about the KCP loss. And I have a couple other concerns about this team that we'll get to. But just think about this, Logan. Before KCP, without Jamal Murray, without Michael Porter Jr. outside of the 9 games that he played, and with a clearly worse bench than this year, like a significantly worse bench, the Nuggets won 48 games in 2022. That's just what Jokic does for a team. He doesn't get hurt. He'll play 75 games, and he is an unmatched force in the sport who elevates this team at a historic level. And I do still believe in this team's fundamental offensive formula. I still believe they can defend at an above average level. I think they're clearly the second best team in the West, and people aren't talking about them like that. People are talking about them as more of an afterthought, like they're fourth or whatever. I don't question that they're the biggest threat to OKC.
You've talked me into it.
Yeah.
You've talked me into the bench. Because, I mean, I did start thinking about it over the past couple of years. And, I mean, they've just been getting demolished in non-Jokic and non-Jamal Murray minutes. And, like, just specifically at those two positions, they have upgraded. Like, it's been an absolute disaster with one or both of those guys off the floor. And Jamal is incapable of really generating offense with Jokic off the floor, just by himself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the right role. Because I was thinking about this in the context of Russ on the floor. The reason I was so skeptical about it, I think I was thinking about it in the wrong way. I was thinking about it with Russ on the floor with Jamal and MPJ and Jokic. That's not going to happen a lot. Like,
No.
You can kind of just cut Russ off the leash and let him go to work because he's not going to be on the floor with those guys. And so I think this can work. I think you limit minutes where he has to be on the floor with the stars, and I think he can complement them if he commits to a role. But you're just asking him to run the show with those guys off the floor, and that's kind of the ideal situation for Russ, is letting him go to work. And I think there's good floor spacing around him with the bench unit where he can exert his, potential on the game. He can get downhill to the rim and kick out the shooters. You've talked me into it, man. I think I like I'm gonna give the Nuggets a few more wins than I had before I was coming into this segment. Just thinking about the deficit that they've been working in with Jokic and Murray off the floor. It's probably been the worst bench in the league. I mean, they have been getting outscored crazy with those guys off. Yeah, you've talked me into it, man. I'm a little more in on the Russ experiment. They've improved. The bench has improved a lot. So. Yeah, I had them at 52 wins. I think I'm going to bump them up to like 54.
I have them winning 54. I'm very high, and part of this is just like the ultimate faith in Nikola Jokic, man. Like, just don't discount what the best player in basketball, clearly the best player in basketball, is capable of, in my opinion, a dude who makes a strong case as the best offensive player ever. I do have a couple questions about this team, though, and one of them is, can Jokic find his jumper? Because in the 2024 playoffs, he was under 0.9 points per jumper. In the 2023 season overall, he was at 1.2. He was an elite jump shooter, but he was cold as a jump shooter against Minnesota, Game 7, especially from beyond the arc, and he was cold as a jump shooter in the Olympics. When his jump shot is going, I think he is the greatest offensive player ever. I think he is completely unstoppable, and I do expect it to come back this year. I just think the track record is so established. Like, is he going to shoot 46% from deep like he did in the 2023 playoffs? No, that was special. That was outlier stuff in the positive direction. But I absolutely think that he's a better jump shooter than he showed in the postseason last year, and I expect it to come back. The bigger question is, will Jamal Murray bounce back? On that front, I'm optimistic too, though. And I'm not saying that Jamal is going to play at 2023 playoffs level where he's a 25 point per game scorer and he's efficient, and we're talking about this as being one of the all-time great duos with the level they played at within that run. But a lot of people are very quick to say right now, he's not the same player, and basically discount Denver's chances as a contender because of Jamal Murray. And there's no question, he was awful in the playoffs. Awful. And he was awful for Team Canada. But obviously, he was also dealing with a calf strain throughout that period that really hindered his explosiveness. He's never a super explosive guard, right? He never pressures the rim at a high level, but it was really inhibitive, and especially dealing with the sort of intense ball pressure that he was against Minnesota, he just couldn't get by those guys. Like, he couldn't create any separation. I think he's healthy now. That's the biggest thing. Jamal is a volatile player because he is so reliant on his pull-up shot. And his value is very directly tied in with his scoring. He's an average playmaker. He's a mediocre defender. Like, he's got to be making his tough shots to be a really impactful basketball player. But over the scope of his career, he's shown us he's an elite pull-up shooter. And I don't think that that has just dissipated. I think he had a really bad run, and I think that he was hurt. So yes, I think that Jamal Murray can be the number 2 on a title team with Nikola Jokic as your number 1, the best player on the planet. I don't think he's an elite basketball player. But Jokic is a different kind of force, man. And I still think that MPJ and Aaron Gordon are so good at what they do. MPJ is another dude who had an uncharacteristically bad shooting series against Minnesota. I don't think that continues. What did we see that was problematic for them against Minnesota, Logan? It was the lack of shot creation and the ability to create off the bounce alongside Jokic. That got exposed in that one matchup by a team that could guard Jokic better than anybody else, that was extremely physical at the point of attack, and it was able to give Jamal Murray fits, and Jamal also just played really poorly in a vacuum. Like, that formula doesn't exist in the same way for Minnesota anymore without Karl Anthony Towns. And I don't think that that's nearly as much of a long-term concern as it was in that specific matchup, as long as Jamal plays at a decent level. And if he can do that, and Christian Braun can be a solid three-point shooter, I still think this is an incredible offensive formula. I think they can defend at a high level. I think they have a better bench, and they have undoubtedly the best player in the world, and that still makes them a major threat and a major player, and probably my number 3 title contender overall. Like, clearly below both Boston and OKC, but I am far, far, far from out on Denver, and I think I'm still a good bit higher on them than the consensus. I think that people have overreacted with some of the panic about them.
I completely agree, and I think people wanted to write Denver off after their title run. I don't think people liked them as a championship contender for some reason. I think they thought it was flukish or something. Last season, this team was top 10 on both sides of the ball. They were the number 5 offense in terms of offensive rating. They were the number 8 defense in defensive rating, and they were the number 4 team in terms of net rating. And you talk about that series against Minnesota, it was a catastrophic disaster on all parts. It was everybody falling apart. Jokic shot 23% from deep. Murray shot 33% from deep. MPJ shot 33% from deep. Like, nobody pulled their weight. And if we think back to their championship run, again, they have lost key contributors, KCP and Bruce Brown, obviously. But Jokic had one of the greatest offensive playoff runs in NBA history. Jamal Murray balled uncontrollably. MPJ didn't miss jumpers. It's like, that is still a great offensive formula. And like you said, I think the team who had the recipe, Minnesota, gave it up. And that's a huge difference maker. Because I think basketball is so dependent on the individual matchups and who you draw in the playoffs. And that was a bad matchup for Minnesota. And I'm not going to act like Minnesota doesn't have a good recipe, right? I think they can still bottle up Jamal. I think they can make life hard on MPJ. I think they gave up the secret sauce in defending Nikola Jokic, and that's a huge component of them getting knocked off. And when I look at other teams in the Western Conference, nobody else has that recipe other than Oklahoma City, right? I think Dallas can throw a good punch. I think Minnesota can throw a good punch. And I'm not saying they can't beat Denver. They definitely can. But Minnesota gave up the special recipe that I think could negate what Denver does at a high level. And Oklahoma City's the only other team that I look at that has that kind of recipe that can knock Denver off. And yeah, man, I still definitely believe in Denver in ways that I don't believe in other teams. I think they are the number 2 team for me out west. I think you're right, man. I think a lot of people have overcorrected. They've oversteered with this skid. And so, yeah, I still believe in Denver, man. I think just go back to that playoff run where they won it all. I mean, that's a special team. And if Jokic gets back his jumper, which is a big if because he's been consistently off for a very long time now, right?
Well, not a very long time.
I would say playoffs and Olympics included, Jokic's jumper was just off, right? If we're going to flag Jamal for being off with his jumper, I think we also have to flag Jokic for being off. I just want to give him the same treatment that we're giving other players. You know, Tatum, if we're going to criticize him, right? It's been off for a prolonged period of time, so it is a major concern. But I think the Jokic that we saw in the championship run is the Jokic that I believe in. I think that is the player that we should expect is going to return to form. So
Yeah.
I'm not going to write off Denver, man. I think you're stupid if you write off Denver. I still very much believe in them. Is Oklahoma City better? Yes, I think they are. But Denver's still definitely a contender. And the margins are super close for me between these two teams.
Dude, And even with his jumper being off last year, even while facing the nightmare defense matchup, and by the way, with an offense that was really underperforming around him, so like they were able to do some ridiculously aggressive doubling in that series, Jokic averaged 29, 13.5, and 9 on 63% true shooting in the playoffs last year.
Down series, man. It was a down playoff run.
Exactly. And yet he still played 3 of the best games consecutively in games 3 through 5 against Minnesota offensively that we have seen in the history of this sport. Games 4 and 5 were next level masterpieces. So I have the utmost confidence in him. And like that alone made me tempted to just be bold and take them to beat OKC, because I don't think that there's an answer for Jokic around the league right now. The problem is OKC's just too talented, and I think that with Hartenstein as a primary post defender and with Chet helping, like it's not going to be as effective a version as what Minnesota did, but it's not a bad answer. And they do have the sort of hounds on the perimeter who can apply some pretty aggressive ball pressure to Jamal. And so it looks different than Minnesota. They're not as physical, but I think that they don't have a bad formula whatsoever for guarding this Denver offense. And then they in their own right are just so absurdly skilled. Like, I think the talent deficit is just too great for this Denver team without KCP for me to pick it outright. But could it happen? I do think it could happen. Absolutely, right? If J-Dub and Chet aren't super consistent, then you get the version of Jamal Murray that you expect. MPJ, who is an elite shooter. That's part of what didn't make sense to me. A lot of people freaking out about MPJ this offseason. Like, you've always known what MPJ is. He is a crazy spot-up weapon. He is not going to be more than that, but it is rare that he's off as a shooter, and he was off as a shooter against Minnesota. Like, I think you bank on him being an elite shooter again this time around. And then, yeah, Denver has the upside to beat anybody. I legitimately still think they do. Like, they are in that inner circle of title contenders.
I mean, sometimes your jump shot just isn't hidden, man. I think people can overstate some of those issues, man. Yeah, I believe in Denver. I believe in Denver. That's the thing, man. There's no other teams that I look at out west. You know, I know Dallas went to the finals last year, but it's like I still don't even put Dallas above Denver, man. No. It's foolish to me, man.
And like you say, matchups are a huge part of it. I still think that overall Denver was the best team in the West last year. I don't think they're going to be as good this year because of the KCP loss. I think they're going to be better than a lot of people think. The roller coaster of an NFL season is moving right along, and it promises to be a month full of tricks, treats, and of course, touchdowns. And DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, is the #1 place to bet touchdowns.
Running it in from the 1 or an 80-yard bomb, we don't care how they score touchdowns. We want to bet on them. DraftKings heard us and is delivering. Ready to place your first bet? Try betting on something simple, like a player to score a touchdown. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick.
Here's a reason for new customers to do a touchdown dance of their own. Bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Score big with DraftKings Sportsbook, the #1 place to bet touchdowns. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code NERDS. That's code NERDS for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. But Logan, we talk about matchups. And the matchup nightmare for Denver last year was the Minnesota Timberwolves, who I presume you have next in this division unless you are sky high on Scoot Henderson and the Portland Trailblazers,
Hell no, man.
What are you expecting out of them? Obviously, they also had a big offseason, the biggest offseason probably of any of these teams, with the Julius Randle, Karl Anthony Towns swap, also bringing in Dante DiVincenzo in that move. How do you feel about that for this team?
So I've had a little bit more time to reflect. I still don't like this trade for Minnesota, and I think they fundamentally made a mistake trading away Karl Anthony Towns, specifically because I think they gave up their biggest advantage in the West for 2 reasons. One, as I mentioned earlier as we were discussing Denver, I think they had the best recipe to defeat Denver, and I think it's just foolish giving up the secret formula, so to speak, with Denver, right? They could still potentially draw them. I think they had the best matchup combination against Jokic, as you mentioned, putting Gobert in the roamer role, letting him sit around the rim, taking away lobs to Aaron Gordon, letting Karl Anthony Towns work with Jokic one-on-one because he's such a physical outlier. And also, just the fact that that jumbo-sized lineup made them impervious to other athletic advantages that other teams would have, right? You're always going to have two big guys around the rim that can protect it at a high level. You're always going to have great rebounding. That's there are things that don't change. So I still don't like that aspect of it, but having time to reflect on the Julius Randle deal, I think it can work. I'm not going to predict it to work, but I think it can. And so I want to give some positives. It does give Minnesota more cap flexibility. I think that Julius does bring some secondary ball handling and play creation that Karl Anthony Towns just didn't bring you with his archetype. He's not going to handle. Julius can handle it. He can create for himself in a little bit the way that Cat just can't. And he's still a really good positional rebounder. He's still a good mismatch attacker. So there are positives that I think that Julius Randle does bring. And I don't want to just completely rag on him the way that I was. I have found some positives in this deal. I don't trust Randle to be consistent. I think that is the biggest flaw when it comes to Julius Randle, is just him being consistent on a night-to-night basis. And also, as you mentioned, when we did that pod, Carson, he's still not under contract past this season, which I think is a bigger issue, right? If you end up losing him in free agency after a down year, then you just gave up an asset for nothing, for cap space effectively. But I still think this team is going to be an elite defense. They were the number one defense in the regular season, 108.4. I think they get a little worse on that end just because I think Cat's a good defender, and I think he's a great rebounder. But you still bring that personnel back. Jaden McDaniels is back. Anthony Edwards is back. You still have dogs on the perimeter, right? Nickeil Alexander-Walker you still have coming off the bench. And they bring in Terrence Shannon Jr. I like him too, man. That guy's got great physical tools, and he's got one hell of a motor. But I do see some regression. I think the offensive fit is going to be way more clunky with a Julius Randle and Rudy Gobert front court. McDaniels is not an elite floor spacer at this point in his career, so I think we're going to get some more of the same. I think this is going to be an elite defense with a clunky half-court offense, very similar to how they were last year. I think it's going to be more clunky this year with Julius Randle in the fold, though. And with that, I also do see a little bit of regression in terms of growing pains. It took a minute. It took an entire year of this team playing together to figure out the kinks of a Karl Anthony Towns and Gobert front court. And so that's another reason why I've earmarked regression for this team, is I think it's just going to take some time for them to figure out this fit and how to play together with one another. So in the long run, I think it can work. It gives them more cap flexibility. I think Julius Randle and his skill set bring things that Cat couldn't bring. Right, again, that self-creation, secondary playmaking. Because I do think that was an issue that you saw with this team. Anthony Edwards was the only creator for this team. And when they could throw double teams at him and he couldn't punish them because of the lack of shooting or the lack of elite playmaking, Julius does bring secondary play creation. And Rob Dillingham, I think, off the bench, even as a rookie, is going to bring some creation that you just didn't have off the bench. But again, I think it's going to be a little more clunky this year, and I think it's going to take a few months and maybe this entire year for them to figure out this fit. There's a lot of moving parts here in Minnesota. So I view them as a good basketball team, Carson, and I think maybe some things could break their way where they could win a playoff series. But I just don't see them being a real deal contender. I did. If they had held on, and that's where it hurts me, because I did view this team as a real contender with Karl Anthony Towns. I don't with Julius Randle in the fold this season.
Yeah, to me, it's a pretty clear downgrade, and we talked in depth about this trade. You guys can go back and watch our full reaction to that if you want. I think Randle makes them worse on both sides of the ball. He is a significantly less efficient offensive player. He is significantly inferior as a floor spacer. It's a very clunky fit, and it was already a clunky fit, but when you take away a 40+% high-volume three-point shooter and replace him with somebody who is as inconsistent and generally overall inefficient there as Randle, makes things that much harder. Defensively, he hasn't ever engaged in a team defense like Cat did last year. He brings no rim protection, where Cat brought some, right? Mediocre for a center, but nevertheless, he just has more size and length there. Doesn't bring Cat's post defense. Yeah, like, he's thick, he's strong, but he's not 7 foot like Cat is, right? So he's not going to be as valuable. Are you laughing at the fact that I said he's thick, Logan?
Yes, they got me.
Grow up, pal. He is. He's got a big, juicy ass, all right? Like, obviously, he brings clear offensive value here. He is going to be productive. He brings his rebounding. He brings his mismatch attacking. He brings playmaking. But he's very erratic. And I unequivocally prefer Cat's floor spacing. I still think that Cat can handle and attack certain mismatches. I think that he is more effective and efficient as a post player. I do think Cat is a better pure passer. He just doesn't have the ball in his hands as much to rack up the same assist numbers. I just think Cat is a better all-around basketball player, and he's not a historic playoff disaster in the way that Julius Randle is. Cat obviously has had his inconsistencies in the playoffs. Randle is literally worse than any star that we've ever seen in terms of his playoff sample size so far. So yeah, to me that is the main headline for the Timberwolves. That and the fact that losing Cat gives up their key component to guarding specifically the Nuggets. It knocks them down a peg for me in the West. There is good news here, though. Anthony Edwards should get better. I think that his playmaking should marginally improve. I think his defensive focus should hopefully marginally improve. I think he'll continue to grow and become a more consistent, efficient offensive number one. Still working under difficult circumstances here because the half-court offensive talent isn't great. Ant's never been a super efficient regular season scorer. And that is worth noting. I don't think that that's just going to change this year. I don't think he's going to be a great offensive engine in the scope of the best players in the league where he makes this a top 10 group. I'm not expecting that sort of leap out of Ant. I just think he's going to continue to get a little better and play like a top 10 player this season in the regular season, where last year he was more of like a top 15 guy in the regular season and then played really, really well overall in the playoffs, played like a bona fide superstar for the first 2 rounds. So they have Ant as their offensive foundation, their rising superstar, and this team defense is still going to be elite. I don't think it'll be best in the league again because I think some of the defenses around them are just insane, and I do think they downgraded a bit going from Cat to Randle, but I would say I prefer OKC now. I think their defense is going to be insane. I prefer Boston, I would say. I prefer Orlando bringing in KCP, potentially playing Jonathan Isaac a little more. So they've gone down a little bit in terms of being the most dominant defense in the league last year, but it should still be a top 5 defense, elite defense. That's a huge foundation for them. And this bench is really good. That's what they do get back in the Cat Randle trade. They get the dynamic shooting from DiVincenzo, which they need, the ability to at time favor offense, put him in there instead of a Jaden McDaniels or a Nikola Alexander Walker just to have that sort of dynamic shot making. And Dante competes defensively. He's obviously not on the level of those guys, but he's a good athlete and he competes and he makes plays. He has instincts there. Naz Reid, obviously, one of the most electric bench players in basketball. Naz Reid. I'm pro Nikola Alexander Walker still. Offensively, he can be frustrating, but he's an elite point of attack defender and he's fine offensively. And I know that a lot of people are going to be focused on bringing in Rob Dillingham, getting him 8th overall. Super, super skilled basketball player in the exact archetype that fans are going to just have their mouths water over because he's an electric scoring guard. But I think there's a lot of work to be done for him in terms of becoming an efficient offensive player, in terms of getting to the rim and finishing consistently there. The playmaking is solid. Defensively, I think he's really going to struggle. Like, he was the toughest bucket from the perimeter in this class. And so you bank on that, and you bank on that long term. He wasn't my favorite, though. I do think, honestly, long term, like a 6th man role would be probably where he's at his best. As a rookie, I would just temper my expectations. I thought Terrence Shannon was a significantly more impactful pick. I think that he immediately, with his athleticism, his defense, his shooting, little bit of playmaking feel, I think he fits in seamlessly. And I think his shooting is probably more bankable than like an Alexander Walker's. He's not an elite shooter, but I thought that was another really good ad who fits in with their identity. I still think this is a really good team, and I definitely think they're a really, really good regular season team. I think they're going to rack up wins because of Ant, that bench, and that defense. I'm more worried about the postseason because of a lot of the Randle stuff.
Yeah, I agree. And the other aspect of this, too, that I think is interesting of the Randle deal is that it does open up and this is what I've heard a lot of Timberwolves people say, is it opens up a bigger role potentially for Naz Reid because they think they can supplement a lot of his value. You know, Naz Reid, one of my favorite stats from this regular season, I mentioned this a bunch, was a 40% shooter from everywhere behind the arc, every spot, corners, above the break, top of the key, on the wing, literally everywhere. And I do think this bench is improved because you think about the biggest issue and the biggest flaw of this team last year was the offense and the half court creation and the shooting, and they addressed a lot of that in the offseason, right? By adding Dante DiVincenzo, by letting Naz Reid get a bigger role, bringing in Rob Dillingham. Their fall off in defense, I think, by giving away Cat is not going to completely offset itself, but it's offset itself a little bit in terms of how much better the bench has gotten and how much better their half court offense should be a little bit. So I think that their issues are going to be like you said. I think their issues are going to be shown more in the playoffs in a specific matchup. But I think this is going to be a good regular season team, and they have lineup versatility too. We talk about that with the Thunder. You've got more guys that can shoot here. Where if a guy's cold in the game, you can turn to him. If it's DiVincenzo, if it's Naz Reid, they have more athletes. I think if you want to give Terrence Shannon some burn. And I love Terrence. That was the steal of the draft to me, man. I could not believe he fell so far. Like, I think he is going to impact the game at such a high level as a rookie with his athleticism, with his defense, with how he can run the floor. The guy's an insane athlete.
Doesn't matter at all to them. He's 23, but they don't care. They're trying to win now.
He's ready to play right now. And so if that shot does come along, like you were looking at a very high-impact rookie player immediately. So, yeah, I have this team winning a lot of regular season games, but I think their issues will probably rear their ugly head in the playoffs where Ant's going to face a lot of double teams again. Is this team going to be able to make them pay? Shooting the ball around him. Is he going to be able to make his ass off the way he needs to? And I see it still being issues. I think teams are going to be able to play off of Rudy Gobert the way they always have been. If Julius Randle isn't knocking down shots, that's another guy that you can just completely sag off of. Jaden McDaniels is an inconsistent. Like, there's so limited floor spacing in this starting five that I think they are just going to be able to throw everybody at Ant. And I think that's where the offensive inconsistency is going to become a major issue. But I do think this is a good regular season team. And I think it's probably going to be a year or two from now where we really evaluate this team and look and go, did Rob Dillingham progress enough? Did Anthony Edwards get better as a playmaker and a distributor? Has Mike Conley fallen off a cliff? Do these guys fit together with Julius Randle? There's a lot of questions, I think, a year or two from now where we're going to be looking at this team and saying, are they a real contender? But they'll be a good regular season team this year. I just don't view them in championship contender conversations the way I did last year.
Half-court offense has always been the struggle for them. It was always going to be the struggle for them. And to me, they just downgraded in their starting lineup their spacing, their skill, their efficiency, their size all at once, going from Cat to Julius Randle. And that's where, like, Cat just did give you a ceiling, man. I mean, the level that he's capable of playing at offensively. You think about what he was able to do in a rock fight of a Game 7 against the Nuggets. He emerges from that, not just defending his ass off, but being like the only efficient offensive player on the floor. I'm sorry, I don't trust Julius Randle to do that, and that to me is a death knell for their title hopes. Their bench has improved. It doesn't outweigh what they lose there, and just my fundamental lack of faith in Julius Randle. Like, we just did this whole spiel when we reacted to the trade in real time, but what is he in his playoff career, Logan? It's like 17 a game on 46% true shooting with more turnovers than assists.
Yeah, it's something like
that. It's the worst playoff performance we've ever seen from a star. That is not hyperbolic. That is objective fact.
He's got the worst true shooting percentage of any 15-point-per-game scorer in the playoffs since 2000. What's even worse is you can expand that number to 10 points per game, and he still has the worst true shooting percentage of any player. It's horrid stuff. And you know what?
Horrific.
Real quick, just because I saw a lot of people get on us after the Cat Randle initial trade when we came out with our takes afterward, and people were really critical of me saying that Cat was more consistent than Julius Randle and me calling him a consistent player. It's like that's just an objective fact. Neither of these guys are rock solid, consistent players, right? Like Cat has obviously had his bad moments. Julius Randle has just had worse moments. Like if you're asking me to pick between them, do I want one of the greatest shooters ever at the big man spot ever? That's not even like me. That's not getting hyperbolic. That is a fact. Karl Anthony Towns is one of the greatest shooting big men in the history of basketball. Or do I want one of the biggest playoff floppers in NBA history? That's a no-brainer, man.
Yeah. I will say consistency is definitely not something that has defined Cat, right? He has been frustratingly inconsistent, not remotely to the level that Julius Randle is. I mean, this is one of the streakiest basketball players that we've seen, and unfortunately in big moments it tends to err on the wrong side of that because he takes a lot of these tough pull-up jumpers and he's just not consistently good there. It's been brutal in the playoffs. He becomes a black hole. He takes your offense out of rhythm. That's another thing. He's a big-time ball stopper. The playmaking has failed him when it matters. Like, I'm sorry, man. I just couldn't be more out on Julius Randle.
The last thing I want to add, too, is just the one thing that I'm highlighting is with the Wolves' defensive identity and their culture. I want to see if Julius Randle, when he's having these bad offensive games, if he hangs his head. Because that's the other side of this, is when Randle is just faltering completely offensively, he has a tendency to just disengage even more defensively than he already is. And that can't happen here. That's going to be unacceptable.
No. Agreed. And then you bring in the great Naz Reid, the almighty Naz Reid. And obviously the angle of this for the Timberwolves is you get off a Cat's contract and you hope you're more flexible long-term and you can pay Naz, and they really love Naz. And who doesn't love Naz? But I do think that there's a bigger gap between Cat and Naz that a lot of people like to admit. I think that there's a big gap in terms of passing, which is a valuable thing that Cat does that goes underrated. I think just the raw size, rebounding, post defense, Naz cannot do what Cat did to Nikola Jokic. And if you think he did, or you think he can, then you're wrong. Post scoring, I think that Cat is more effective there. Like, Naz is awesome, obviously. He's got a ridiculous handle. He's a ridiculous shooter for his size. He's a really good athlete, but he's not Karl Anthony Towns. And I think that oftentimes people act too much like he is because they like Naz and they don't like Cat. I think that they're clearly my fourth team in the West behind OKC, Denver, and Dallas. I'm just too worried about that half-court offense, and I'm too worried about Julius Randle.
Yeah, I don't know where they're going to be seeding-wise, but I might have the Wolves lower in terms of like actual contenders. Like I think I'm going to have them below Dallas in terms of championship potential. I might have them below Phoenix, and that may sound crazy because I just I think Phoenix's defense is going to be too hard to win, but I just don't think Minnesota's offense is going to be good enough to get there. So yeah, Minnesota has fallen considerably in terms of championship contention. I've got them winning 49 games. I see a little bit of a fall off. And again, with a lot of these teams out west, I think they're better than the record would indicate. But the West is going to be cutthroat this year, man. There's so many good teams.
Yeah, I still have them winning 51. I do think they're going to be a really good regular season team. And I have them hosting a playoff series, but I think that they are going to be a pretty clear second round exit to me. All right, Logan, let's get down to this next tier here. Who do you like more? Do you like Jazz? You like Jazz? Or do you like the Trailblazers?
I do think I like the Jazz a little bit more just because I like their offensive
Jazz.
identity. Yeah, I do like Jazz. I just think the Jazz are going to be able to get buckets the way they were last year. This team was dead last in defensive rating, 119.6. Horrid, but that wasn't their goal. Their goal was to go get buckets, man. They were a slightly below league average offense, and you can give a lot of credit to that to Lauri Markkanen. I mean, Markkanen made this offense elite, and he has such a unique skill set and how he scores the ball. You know, you talk about guys that earlier that would fit basically anywhere, like Caruso or Isaiah Hartenstein. And I think Markkanen kind of falls into that mold where you could drop him in any situation and he would make them a great offense where he doesn't need the ball in his hands. He's going to set screens. He's going to relocate off cuts. He's going to just get to open space. And that's one of my favorite things of Markkanen's game is how he just moves within the flow of the offense. It's beautiful the way he gets his buckets. And he's on a really great value contract right now. One of my big questions about Utah is if they hold him through the trade deadline because I don't think Markkanen fits this timeline for Utah. Utah's got a lot of young talent that we're going to talk about here today. Some of my favorite guys in the draft they have nabbed over the past couple of years. So I love a lot of their young talent here. But Markkanen just doesn't really seem like he fits. He is what makes this team great, but this team is just so far away from being a real contender. So I wonder if he lasts through the trade deadline with the value contract he's on. But there's a lot of young guys I like here. They get Cody Williams, who I thought was probably the biggest value pick in this draft. I had Cody as a top 5 pick here, just with his physicals, how he plays the game, and can seamlessly fit within a team context. He's a really long athlete. I like his shooting touch. I like him as a cutter. Again, he just plays within the flow of the offense. He makes good decisions. He doesn't really make mistakes. He's raw as a scorer. I would compare Cody to like a Buzelis kind of type in the sense that he's a winning talent. I don't know, how much he's going to raise your ceiling, but he's got a really good floor. And so if he can figure out putting the ball in the basket, if he can figure out his scoring, I think you're looking at a guy that's got a complete skill set. They get Isaiah Collier late in the first round, who I think is a awesome young talent. I thought he was the best point guard in the draft, and the fact that they got him late is a steal. They got Keontae George 2 years ago. I loved Keontae George. The kid's a bucket. They get Filipowski, which is really ironic, but I like Filipowski's skill set in terms of him spacing the floor.
I don't know that it's a coincidence.
Yeah.
I really don't think it is.
I don't think it is either, man. A lot of teams are off him, and Utah just happens to nab him. But I like his skill set, too. He's a young stretch big that I think can...
He's a Mormon, for anybody who didn't know.
Thank you for spelling it out, Carson.
But it's actually not good because he's got some weird older girlfriend who maybe groomed him. You remember that whole story? That's no good.
I don't like that. Apparently, she brainwashed him or something, and now he has no contact with his family. That's a weird situation, man.
Not good.
But, hey, man, apparently Utah should love him, right? He'll fit right in down there.
He can hoop. I like Filipowski a lot.
I do. He's got a little bit of a handle, too, for a guy his size. He's like clearance Chet Holmgren, man. And also, dude, he's got a...
Very, very clearance.
Very clear. But he's got a butter smooth post game, too, man. Some of the turnaround stuff that we would see him do at Duke, shooting over his shoulder, getting to post hooks and he's got a smooth game for such a big guy. He is a skilled big man. And when you think about what Utah wants to do, play fast, space the floor, move the ball, he fits their identity. And so that's basically what I'm looking at Utah. Take inventory of the young guys that you got, figure out who is going to be a part of this team's identity moving forward. And there's a lot of young talent to like here. I don't think they're going to win a ton of games. I don't think they're going to play defense. But they're going to be a lot of fun to watch. I liked watching Utah last year. And there's a lot of young guys that I believe in too, man. Taylor Hendricks I liked, right? So I think it's just figuring out which young guys are the building blocks of your young franchise and moving on from there. But I don't think it's a bad spot to be in, man. Obviously, the Jazz aren't contenders, but they've got so much young talent here that I believe in. So, yeah, I don't have them winning a ton of games, but I think they're going to be a lot of fun to watch. I think they're going to play up-tempo. I think they're going to space the floor. And I believe in a lot of these young guys, man. They've got a lot of young talent over the past 2 years. So they're going to be a lot of fun to watch.
I have them winning 29 games. I feel like last year they were kind of the default pick to finish last in the West, and then through 20-something games they were 500. And there's two real reasons for that. Number one, Lauri Markkanen is one of the most impactful offensive players in the sport, period, because of his insane off-ball gravity and his elite efficiency and his otherworldly shooting at his size and his constant movement. He is a really, really high-end offensive engine, and he doesn't get enough credit for that. The other reason is I think Will Hardy is a great offensive coach. I think he's a great coach, period. But you put those two things together and you have a group that can overachieve its talent on paper, probably because a lot of these other tanking teams, right? They just don't have that one dude. Lowry's a top 30 player. The other teams in this range don't have anybody close to that, and I think people can underestimate how much that just boosts your win total. Not in a way that really matters, but in a way that if you're just saying, oh, well, this entire roster isn't as good as this other young tanking team's entire roster, don't underestimate the impact of Lowry. He's the man. I'm with you. It's kind of weird that they are extending him, and I get it. They don't want to accept a suboptimal trade offer. Just selfishly, I would like to see him on a contender because I think he's such an easy fit as a second option anywhere because he's so low usage, high efficiency, high impact. I like the configuration of their front court, though, not just because Lowry's a stud. Looks like they're going to finally stop the nonsense and just start Walker Kessler for the full year, which I think is great. I mean, he's an awesome pure rim protector, like simple skill set, but damn good at what he does. I'm still in on Taylor Hendricks. I thought that he put out some really impressive defensive tape last year, guarding some of the league's best players in the second half of the year. On an island, he can move with those guys. He's long. He's a good athlete. He's engaged. He averaged 2.5 stocks per 75 possessions. He shot 38% from three. He rebounded well. He got out in transition. He basically delivered on all the stuff that I thought made him a very safe pick when Utah took him. I want to see him attack out of the post a little more because that was something he did really effectively in college. But I think he's just a really solid dude. He was never somebody who had star upside, but I thought he was a very bankable, quality two-way basketball player, and I still think that he is. Now, this was the worst defense in basketball last year, and it's still going to be bad. But if you start Kessler and Hendricks in your front court for a full year, they can improve. Like, you're banking on young dudes, but Kessler's already there as like a high-end defensive anchor, purely around the rim in the paint. And I think Hendricks is going to be a good defensive forward sooner rather than later. It really is about the young guys. I know you're a huge Keontae George guy. I thought he had a good rookie season. I am intrigued by him. I'm not too optimistic.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with him is the same as it was as a prospect. He just does not get to the rim. 7% of his shots came inside of 3 feet as a rookie. Like, that's when you're supposed to be at your athletic peak. That is an unfathomably low number. That's a 36-year-old Steph Curry kind of number. There's no question he has game. He has skill. He can really handle. He creates space on his pull-up jumpers. He's an above-average playmaker, so he's a fun watch. I just worry that his shot diet is always going to be tough pull-up jumpers, and he's never going to have that ability to get to the rim, and then he'll always be inefficient because of that. He was just a 32nd percentile pick-and-roll creator last year, and he's a rookie, but also, like, that's what he does. That's where his value is 100%. And is he a good enough playmaker to offset those concerns I have about his scoring efficiency? I think he is a good playmaker, but not good enough, in my opinion.
That's why I like Collier more long-term for this team. And I was always nervous about Keontae. Like, I think Keontae may be like that six-man kind of guy. Just he's also not a good defender, too. And when you're just looking at, like, all-around skill sets, it just makes him ineffective in certain areas of the game where you can't be. But I like Collier more because Collier can get downhill. He plays way more physically. He's built like a bulldog. Like, he's just strong. He's low to the ground. And, again, he weaponizes his physicality in a way that Keontae just can't. I don't think he's as shifty as Keontae, but I think he does more winning things. I like him as a pull-up jump shooter, too. He's a decent perimeter shooter. I think his shot is obviously what has to come along, but I like his feel out of the pick and roll. I think he's a good playmaker, and he may not be a good defender year one, but I think he's got the tools to be a good defender long term. Again, strong base, strong guy. I just couldn't believe, in my opinion, I thought that Collier was the best downhill primary ball handler in the draft in terms of just weaponizing his physicality and strength, and I think that's going to translate. He brings a different skill set than these other young guards, and that's why I like Collier more. So it may not show itself through numbers or his efficiency his rookie year, but long-term, I do think Collier can be the building block point guard for this franchise. And again, to get him that late in the draft, this was a guy who was the number one high school recruit, not that long ago. I think Collier is going to be the building block of this backcourt.
I'm not as high on him as you are. It's always a bit crazy to me when you say you thought he was the best point guard in the class. Like, are you considering
maybe
Reed
not
a combo
over
guard? Are you considering Dillingham a combo guard?
Not including Shepard and Stephon Castle.
Castle, of course, as well.
Because Castle's...
What are we considering Topic?
You can get... I would have taken Collier
Topic
over Topic. I know you like Topic.
That's another dude waiting in the wings for the Thunder.
Yeah,
My
that's
God.
Crazy, man. That's actually ridiculous.
Nasty.
Shepard, I think, is probably... If we're going just like best guards, I would have probably gone Shepard 1, Castle 2, and then I would have had Collier 3.
Yeah. I definitely do prefer Dillingham, and I know that I said not to expect a ton from him this year, but, like, he was impressively efficient as a freshman at Kentucky last year, and he was an insane jump shooter, pulling up and off the catch, good off movement, really good floater touch, really like twitchy, jittery guy, dynamic ball handler. Like, I don't want to undersell how gifted of an on-ball scorer Rob Dillingham is. I just have questions about the periphery of his game, and again, I do think that you can't expect him to like carry your bench unit as a rookie. I like Collier, though. I thought he was a good value pick. I have some more questions, maybe. I do think he's a good athlete. I don't think he's an elite one. I'm worried about the shot. I think it's unproven. It's inconsistent. He can get a little reckless with the ball as a playmaker, but I think there's high upside for him as a playmaker. I think there's a clear defensive foundation. He's strong. As you mentioned, he has good footwork. I think Collier's good. I wouldn't bank on him being like a starting guard for you or a foundational piece, but I do think he'll find success in the league. I think that he's definitely a dude who can have an impact in a few different ways. I like Cody Williams, who obviously they take higher a lot. I don't expect him to have a big impact this year. I think he's another guy, young, slight. We'll see how much burn he gets. I don't know, because the front court's a little bit crowded here, but he was a dude who I was really high on. I thought he was a great value pick as well. I mean, just a bunch of positive traits, right? Just kind of does everything for you. He can change pace at 6'8". He's super long, 7'2" wingspan, great finisher, good touch. Not a great ball handler, but a good one. Good playmaking feel, good defensive tools, good in transition, good cutting feel offensively, solid catch and shooter. We'll see how the shot comes along for him. He's just a guy who I'm very confident being a good player. I don't think that he has a much of a star ceiling, but I think he's definitely like a good jack-of-all-trades wing. I thought he was a good pickup. And Filipowski, we already touched on, but just like a super versatile offensive big who basically does everything for you there, and then defensively can play multiple coverages. I think that he was a really good pickup. So it was a really good draft for Utah. No doubt about that. But again, we're talking about rookies here. And with Hendricks and Keontae George, we're talking about second-year guys. They're really young. And the reason I have them losing a couple more games than last year, even though I think they've added more young talent, is because there were a couple of vets who, kept the ship afloat for most of the year last year. Olynyk and Fontecchio. Fontecchio's not an NBA vet, but he's 28. He plays grown man, smart, winning basketball. Like, you just lose some experience there. You lose some polish. Sexton's been playing well here, but I think that the defensive backcourt is going to be disastrous. I think they're going to be a bad defense. They're well coached. They have a legit star. They do have young talent that I like. This team is still very, very far away, though.
Yeah, they are. I've got them winning 32 games. I have them winning one more than last year. You make a good point about the veterans, but the thing that I liked about Utah is even though they were dead last in defensive rating, I never felt like Utah was mailing it in defensively. Like, I still think this is a team that gives effort and tries, and they play fast. And I think they're going to be able to boat race some teams. Like, they are going to be able to just put up buckets in bunches. And I like Will Hardy as a coach. So as long as they have Lauri Markkanen, I think this team is going to win at least 30 games. I just believe in Lauri like that as an offensive engine. But they're still far away, and they're obviously punting on, this timeline. There is no timeline right now. But this is a good spot, I think, for a lot of these young guys with Will Hardy, man. I think he knows what he's doing, and he's going to develop these guys. So
yeah,
Utah's going to be a fun watch, man. I enjoyed watching Utah last year, man, just with that floor spacing
offense
and how they play.
Great off-ball movement, lots of creative off-ball screening and stuff. It's a really nice motion offense. Here's what they'll do, Logan. They'll start hot, as they did in year one with Lowry when they started 12-6. Last year, bro, they were 22-20. You remember when they were just ripping off wins for a stretch there? Will Hardy will show you that he can win with this team, and then they'll say, okay, we don't need to anymore because at the end of the day, we're young. It's all about the tank for now. But shout out to the Jazz, man. I think that they're honestly just in a good spot organizationally in that they have Will Hardy and they have Danny Ainge, and they have some young talent that we really do like. And they have Lauri Markkanen. And whether you want to keep him or move him, I mean, that is a damn good basketball player. So if you're a Jazz fan, maybe you're not super excited for this year, but I think you're in a good spot. It's just going to be about committing to a window. I think that probably does mean moving Markkanen. Down the line. No rush, but at some point. Let's talk Blazers, Logan. This is a team who I feel like a lot of people, not so much like super recently, but a few weeks ago I saw just like literally posting their lineup and being like, eyes emoji. Could this be a scrappy play-in team? I don't think so. You don't think so either. What are you expecting from them?
Well, the biggest reason to me why this team can't be a play-in team is their defense. When you're trotting out a backcourt of Scoot Henderson and Ant Simons, I mean, you're going to get demolished by any good guards.
Yes.
Like, Denny Avdia and Jeremy Grant can be, good wing defenders, but you're also starting DeAndre Ayton at the 5, which brings me to my big point about Portland. I think they should move some of these veteran guys. When Robert Williams gets healthy, I'd trade him. DeAndre Ayton, I would trade him. Jeremy Grant, I would trade him. Denny, they just got him. I don't know what their long-term plans are for Denny. You can figure that out. Donovan Clingan is going to be a stud, though. And so I would just immediately open up this front court and give him as many minutes. The impact that Walker Kessler had as a rookie, I think Donovan Clingan could have immediately. I like his instincts. And he's not a crazy vertical athlete, but he's so positionally sound. He knows where to be. He's got great instincts. And I think he's just better than Ayton. And I don't mean that in terms of raw production, because I think people will take that and they'll go, oh, well, Clingan's not going to score as many points. He's not going to shoot as many mid-range jumpers. I think his impact is going to be better because of how he can individually transform a defense. And so I think that Clingan was a steal to get him where they got him in the draft. I thought Charlotte should have taken him over Salon, but they nabbed him. And I think it was one of the biggest steals of the draft. And so for me, the building block is Clingan because I think he can make this defense great if you surround him with good perimeter talent. So again, I'll reiterate. Long term, I'd trade Ayton. I would trade Robert Williams. I would probably trade Ant Simons just because I don't know if Ant Simons is the biggest winning asset. And I think one team would be willing to give up something to get him. And when I look at the other talent here, it opens up playing time for Shaedon Sharpe, who is also injured right now. It opens up playing time for Chris Murray. I just don't think these guys necessarily fit the timeline that Portland is on right now. And contending teams, I think, would be willing to give you assets to acquire these guys. The crown jewel of this team, I think, that everybody looks at is Scoot Henderson. And it was a rough year for Scoot. He gives you 14 points, 3 boards, 5 assists on 39% from the field, 33% from deep, and under 52% true shooting with 3.4 turnovers a game. I'm not ready to hit the panic alarm on Scoot. He does need to become more efficient. The thing I was most encouraged last year, Carson, I think, by Scoot was towards the end of the year when you saw him becoming more reliant on his mid-range and floater game. And he wasn't efficient from those areas last year. He shot just 37% in the mid-range. He was 38% in the paint, non-restricted area. And he shot an abysmal 48% in the restricted area. But I think you saw, he's not going to be this crazy slasher, Derrick Rose, Russell Westbrook kind of guy immediately. But I like that he was willing to turn to that mid-range and intermediate area because that's what's going to elevate him long-term. And he was not a good shooter. He shot just 33% on above-the-break threes. He shot 31% on jump shots overall. But I'm encouraged. I think that Scoot can be a good point guard in this league. I think it's just going to take him a little bit more time than maybe people were willing to give him. A lot of people, Rookie of the Year. He's exciting. He's a really fun watch, man. And the way he explodes into the paint off of pick and rolls, out of isolation, he's got special athleticism. I just think it's going to take Scoot another year or two before he really figures it out. So I think he's going to be inefficient. I think this is going to be a bad defensive backcourt. If they start Ayton, this is going to be a bad defense overall. But I like the way they're trending long term. And I think a part of them trending upwards long term, like I said, is going to be getting rid of some of these other veterans on the team for younger assets. That's Ayton, that's Simons, that's Grant, most importantly. But I like the young talent here, man. I like Scoot. I like Shaedon. I love Clingan. I like Chris Murray a lot. There's a lot of young guys that I buy into here, but I don't think they're going to be a good team this year. And it starts with the inefficiency from Scoot as a young offensive engine and how bad this defense is going to be. So I have them winning 27 games. I even think that may be overstating Portland. I think I might be even too high on them with 27 wins. But Who the hell is saying this is going to be a play-in team, man? Hand over what you're smoking, dude.
People,
I don't see that at all.
people were saying it. I don't see it at all. I mean, the West is way too good, and this team is too far away. I have them winning 27 games too. I want to start by talking about Scoot because I do think that he is the biggest thing to track for this team. It's about the young talent. I'm definitely not as high on him right now after year one as I was when he was a prospect. I was a Brandon Miller guy over him as a prospect, but I thought that Scoot was really a stellar talent. He just doesn't stand out athletically like I thought he would. He's definitely a good athlete, but he doesn't look like an elite one in the way that I thought he would. You know, I thought this would be one of the most imposing downhill guards that we see in the league, and he wasn't that as a rookie, of course, but it doesn't look like he's going to be that. The finishing was brutal. His efficiency was brutal all year. He definitely got better, though. Post All-Star game, he was almost 17-7, shot 35% from deep, and there are some areas in which I am optimistic about Scoot. I am optimistic about his jump shot. I always think that it's looked better than the numbers, right? He was comfortable from mid-range as a prospect, and it was a little bit reminiscent of Westbrook in that you have like this super athletic downhill guard who the pull-up jumper is a question, but they're a little more comfortable from mid-range than beyond the arc. That was Scoot, but I think Scoot is a better jump shooter than Westbrook, and I think he'll be a better jump shooter than Westbrook. Definitely not that level of player, but a better jump shooter. And I do think he's a very good playmaker. He actually created with average efficiency on ball, too, out of pick and roll and isolation. He's in like the mid 40 percentiles there, which is solid. I mean, when you consider just his overall efficiency. But yeah, the finishing at the rim needs to get way better. The floater touch, the intermediate shot making needs to get better, needs to get more efficient. I strongly prefer Miller. I already did. I prefer Amen Thompson if we're looking at him within the scope of his class, those top guys. But I'm not out on Scoot. Like, rookie guards often struggle. Let's give him some time. Really, I think maybe the key for Scoot is going to be what he becomes defensively. Because as a prospect, I thought that he had real plus defense potential because of his length, because of his athleticism, because of some of the defensive playmaking we saw from him. He was never a super consistent defender, but he was toolsy as hell. And now I just don't know. It's tough to say after a rookie year for anybody in a situation like this. That to me is going to be big, though, because if he offensively isn't the downhill guard that we thought he was in his mediocre jump shooter, and then he's also a negative defender, that's not a dude who I want to be building my team around, or who I want probably starting for my team. But if he can be a plus defender, then you've got something with the athleticism and the playmaking and, again, shooting that I do think is going to improve.
I just wanted to ask real quick, when you're listing off those young guys you prefer to Scoot, would you prefer him or Shaedon Sharpe as a building block if you had to choose?
That's a really interesting question. I think that Shaedon is a safer bet to just be a productive, good NBA player. I think I would still take Scoot because of the playmaking ceiling. I still think that there are more tools for him to be like a really impactful on-ball creator and offensive engine. The thing with Shaedon, I think he's very exciting because he's an insane athlete and he's a really good shooter and he's a really good cutter. Like, I think he fits off ball easily anywhere. So I think he's safer because of that. But I don't think super highly of him as an on-ball creator. I think he's a limited playmaker. He doesn't really have that feel and that pace as a ball handler. I've thought that he's sort of reminiscent of like a Zach LaVine in terms of skill set. And LaVine, you know, efficient 25-point per game scorer. That's really impressive production. I don't even know if I would say that Shaedon gets all the way there, but really the key is, can he buy in more defensively? And I do think he's a more willing off-ball player. I think that he's shown more like poise and just getting it than you've seen from a LaVine maybe. But I think defense is probably going to be the key for him too.
Yeah, I like Shaedon, and I think it can work long term. I do agree. And I think that Scoot's, again, I know the percentages weren't great. I think Scoot's going to figure out his mid-range game, man. His jumper looks smooth. The floater touch got better as the season went along. And again, I think that this first year was kind of a wake up call to him that he needed to develop that, right? That he wasn't just going to be able to physically overwhelm guys at the NBA level the way he has, in the G League or in high school like that. And I'm encouraged by it. And again, I like his feel out of the pick and roll. I think he's going to be good. But like you said, if he doesn't, then it makes you wonder if he's even like playable. But I just don't know if it's going to be this year. I trust Scoot figuring it out long term. I just don't know if it's going to be this year that he puts it all together.
Yeah, I'm holding on to some of my Scoot stock. Like I did a blind rank of young NBA players the other day. Obviously, I don't know who's coming after him, but I put him higher than I think some people would have expected. I still think there's real positive traits there. It's just, is he a guy who I'm like in on, right? Like I'm in on Brandon Miller. I've been in on him. I'm in on Amen Thompson. I've been in on him. I'm not there with Scoot. I can see Scoot failing because his A-plus trait that we bought in on as a prospect isn't an A-plus trait. And that's concerning.
Yeah, that makes sense. It is concerning, but it is. I mean, that's the biggest knock. Like him being that bad finishing around the rim and not being able to have that kind of athletic advantage. It is, but I'm still willing to give him time. But you're right. I'm not in on him the way I do believe in Brandon Miller, just to a completely different level. I just think that Brandon Miller is going to be a star.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's just like obvious at this point. It wasn't at all at the time, though. Remember, 90% of people were on the Scoot side, Logan. We were not here. We were not firmly pro Miller. But I think Amen is a more fair example because it's like still so unclear in terms of just he's still pretty raw. Like there's definitely two ways
and
it can go.
And it's just hard too, because Amen's he's just bigger, right? He's 6'7",
yeah, different
right?
archetypes.
Scoot is 6'2". It's going to be much harder for him to. It's such more, such a larger physical disadvantage.
Yeah. He does look a little smaller out there on the court than I kind of thought he did as a prospect too. Yeah, I don't know. A little concerned with Scoot, but not overreacting to his rookie year. But like you say, is it going to be this year that he's an efficient offensive engine? No. And the fit with him and Simons is weird. They had a negative 20 net rating when they were on the floor together. Like, you just can't, bro. It's such a brutal defensive backcourt. Negative 20, bro. Like, that's actually unfathomable. Two dudes who are best with the ball in their hands. It doesn't work. I've always loved Ant Simons as a talent. I was so high on him in that draft class. But again, as a dude who's getting drafted, in the 20s, and although I still think he's an elite pull-up shooter, and I think he's a really good pick-and-roll scorer and a solid playmaker, like, with his defensive limitations, am I super high on him as a foundational winning piece for you? No, I'm not. And I think if you feel like you need to move him to see what you have in Scoot, that's okay with me. Obviously, Ant is more of a sure thing, but there's more upside with Scoot. I love Klingon. I thought he was, like, probably a top 3 dude in this class, especially because I was prioritizing floor, and I thought that he and Reed Shepherd had the highest floors in the class. Elite rim protector, a powerful finisher, really, really efficient post-up player, good passing big, good body control and touch, but like truly monster rebounder, monster rim protector, monster individual, 7'2" with a 7'7" wingspan. Great post defender, great drop defender. I think he's going to be awesome. Like we were talking about Walker Kessler, I think he brings you Walker Kessler's defense plus a little more because he's so huge. And offensively, I think that he is more skilled, but he's coming off the bench. He's not going to change things for this team this year. I think Denny's very good. I don't think this is a situation where he can necessarily move the needle, though. Like, so much of what he does is the little stuff, right? Connective passing, engaging defensively. He's just such a great complementary player, but in Portland, it's not going to make a difference in the same way it could with a better team where his skill set's more additive, ceiling raising. Jeremy Grant's going to do his thing. He's going to give you 20 a night with mediocre efficiency. Ayton's going to do his thing. He'll put up some decent numbers. He will not perform defensively. I think he's a pretty bad defensive anchor at this point. I don't think this team is a prayer of sniffing the play-in if we're going to look at it through that lens. They have talented players, but I don't think they really gel at the moment, and they're still really young. And Shaedon Sharpe's going to miss a month of the season now, but if I were to rank those guys, Klingon is the one who I'm most confident in, no doubt. Scoot and Shaden are very close. I think that Scoot probably still has the slightly higher ceiling. I don't love either of those two. Like when we compare them to some of these other young talents around the league, there are guys who I'm more in on, but I think that there's talent here, and I think that that's what it's all about. It's about the future. And like you say, they have some dudes who you could move, who maybe you could get a return for now. I don't know if Ayton's that guy. But Jeremy Grant, Denny, I think that those are dudes who could really impact winning elsewhere who you should be trying to move.
Definitely. I think those are major, major winning assets that a contender should be interested in. I would move Aiden as soon as possible, though.
I think, but who wants him?
Yeah. Who wants that on that kind of contract? It's the question. I mean, like, I mean this like right now. I think what Klingon brings defensively and rebounding wise, I think he would help you win more games immediately. And I know people, Aiden was an efficient mid-range scorer, and Aiden can shoot a little bit. Yeah, he's not going to play defense. He's not going to rebound. He's not going to give full effort. I like Klingon so much, man. I'm so in on Donovan Klingon being a complete stud. He's like a tree trunk, man. That dude is.
Oh, he is.
He's
huge.
Built, dude. He's huge.
He's going to be really good. I'd definitely rather have him than Ayton for my team. Ayton was like one of those dudes, one of those centers, who when opposing players tried him at the rim, it had basically no impact on their field goal percentage versus the league average. Again, if you're a center, you should be at least multiple points below. Like his regression defensively and just in terms of caring about the game since the Suns finals run has really been pretty sad, in my opinion. And I get it. The offensive skill is there. The touch is there. But what is it materializing in if he can't defend? He can't anchor you there. Not much. Frustrating. Sad stuff from DeAndre Ayton. All right, my voice is almost dying, so we're going to wrap this one up here. Appreciate all you guys tuning in. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, check out all of our NBA season preview content. We have several division previews that we've already done. If you missed any of those are all in a playlist. I have a video about Cooper Flag coming out tomorrow morning, Saturday morning, so stay locked in for that. And then we'll have more YouTube videos going into real depth, some deep dive video breakdowns on teams and players before the year, along with our remaining division previews and our award predictions and whatnot. We've also got a bunch of NFL content, of course. We have our weekly reactions every Sunday. You can check those out live after the games wrap up. You can follow us across social, Instagram, TikTok at NerdSesh, Twitter at Nerd_Sesh, and you can join our Discord. The link to that is at the link tree across our social media bios. So with that, as always, appreciate you guys. I've been Carson Brabber.
I've been Logan Camden.
And this was NerdSesh.